The morning of September 16, 1994, began like any other day at the aerial school in Rua, Zimbabwe. The private school sat on a dusty plain about 20 kilometers southeast of Harare, a place where the African sun burned hot and the red earth stretched out toward a horizon that seemed to promise nothing but more of the same. 62 children, ages 5 to 12, were outside for their morning break. They were playing, laughing, doing what children do in those brief minutes of freedom between lessons. Then the world stopped. One of the older boys, a 12-year-old named Justin, saw something glint in the sky. He assumed it was a bird at first, but the glint did not move like a bird. It did not flap or glide. It fell straight down, fast, and landed in a patch of scrubland just beyond the school fence. Justin called to his friends. More children turned. What they saw next would haunt them for the rest of their lives. A silver object, shaped like a smooth disc, sat on the ground. It was maybe 10 meters across. No windows, no doors, no markings. Just a seamless metallic surface that seemed to drink the sunlight instead of reflecting it. Then a hatch appeared. Not opened, but appeared, as if the metal simply parted. 2 figures emerged. They were small, about the size of a young child, with large, dark eyes that slanted upward at the corners. They had no hair, no visible mouths, and their skin was grayish-brown. They moved with a fluid grace that did not seem entirely natural, and they stood there, looking at the children as if waiting for something. The children did not run. Most of them later said they felt a strange calm, a sense that the beings were not hostile but curious. Some felt a warmth, almost a greeting. Others felt sadness, a deep and overwhelming sorrow that seemed to come from the beings themselves. It was not spoken. It was felt, directly, as if the beings were broadcasting emotion like a radio signal. The telepathic message, as the children would later describe it, was simple. We are here to warn you. Your technology is destroying the Earth. You must change your ways, or you will destroy yourselves. Then the beings walked back into the craft. The hatch sealed, and the disk rose silently into the sky. It accelerated so fast that it was gone in seconds, leaving only a shimmer of heat in the air. For a few moments, the children stood frozen. Then the silence broke. Some fainted, others began to cry, uncontrollably, sobbing for reasons they could not explain. A few ran to the teachers, babbling about aliens and a silver ship. The teachers assumed it was a game, a shared fantasy, but when they saw the children's faces, the terror, the confusion, the genuine distress, they realized something had happened, something real. Within hours, parents had arrived. The children were taken home, but they would not stop talking about what they had seen. They drew pictures, dozens of them, and those drawings, created independently by children who had not compared notes, showed the same thing: a disc-shaped craft, 2 small beings with large eyes, and a sense of sadness, SS. The consistency was the first crack in the wall of skepticism. The next day, a local journalist named Tim Leach arrived at the school. He interviewed the children one by one. He was a seasoned reporter, not prone to sensationalism. But what he heard made him pause. The children did not repeat a rehearsed story. They struggled to describe something that had no frame of reference in their young lives. They talked about the beings, sadness, the warning about the environment, the feeling of being understood without words. Leach filed his story. It ran in the Zimbabwean newspaper, The Herald. Within days, the story had gone global. The world reacted the way the world always reacts, to UFO stories. Skepticism. Mockery. Dismissal. The children were accused of lying for attention, of being influenced by television shows like The X-Files, which had become popular in Zimbabwe. But there was a problem with that theory. The X-Files had only aired a few episodes in the country, and none of the children had seen it. The environmental warning was not a plot point in any show, and the drawings, analyzed by child psychologists, showed no signs of coaching or collusion. Then came Dr. John E. Mack. Mack was not the kind of person you would expect to investigate a UFO case. He was a Pulitzer Prize-winning biographer, a respected psychiatrist, and the chair of the Department of Psychiatry at Harvard Medical School. His work on the psychology of trauma had earned him international acclaim. He was not a fringe figure, he was the establishment. And that is precisely why his involvement changed everything. In October 1994, Mack traveled to Zimbabwe. He spent days interviewing the children, sometimes alone, sometimes with their parents present. He used open-ended questions, careful not to lead. He recorded everything. What he found disturbed him. The children's accounts were not just consistent, they were emotionally coherent. The being's telepathic message about environmental destruction was not a random detail, it was the core of the experience. The children, from different backgrounds, different ages, different levels of intelligence, all described the same thing: a warning about technology harming the earth. This was not a story they could have invented. It was too specific, too unified, too strange. Mack also noticed something else. The children were not seeking attention. Many of them were traumatized. Some had nightmares for weeks. Others became obsessed with environmental issues, a fixation that seemed to come from nowhere. One boy, who had never shown any interest in nature, began collecting trash and pleading with his parents to recycle. Another girl, who had been carefree and outgoing, became withdrawn, saying she felt the earth was crying. Mack published his findings in a paper and in his book, Abduction: Human Encounters with Aliens. He argued that the Ariel School incident was not a hoax, not mass hysteria, but a genuine encounter with something unexplained. He did not claim to know what the beings were. He only said that the children's experience was real, that it had measurable psychological effects, and that it deserved serious study. The response was immediate and brutal. Harvard Medical School launched an investigation into Mack's research methods. The university was not interested in the UFOs. It was interested in protecting its reputation. Mack had stepped outside the bounds of acceptable inquiry. He had taken the claims of children seriously, and that was dangerous. The investigation stretched for months. Mack's colleagues distanced themselves. The media, which had once celebrated his Pulitzer, now painted him as a crackpot. He was called a disgrace to science, a man who had lost his mind. But Mack did not back down. He had spent his career studying human consciousness, trauma, and the limits of perception. He knew that reality was not always what it seemed. He had seen patients with false memories, yes, but he had also seen patients whose memories were true, even when the world refused to believe them. The Ariel children, he believed, were not lying. They were telling the truth as they experienced it. In 1995, Harvard cleared Mack of any ethical violations, but warned him not to pursue further UFO research. The message was clear: stay in your lane. Mack did not stay in his lane. He continued to investigate cases, to write, to speak. He became a pariah in academia, but he never wavered. He died in 2004, still convinced that the Ariel School encounter was one of the most important events of the 20th century. The story could have ended there. Another UFO case, dismissed, forgotten, filed away in the archives of the bizarre. But it did not end, because the children grew up, and they did not forget. In 2022, a documentary called The Ariel Phenomenon was released. The director, Randall Nickerson, had tracked down the now adult witnesses. They were in their late 30s and early 40s. They had jobs, families, ordinary lives. They were not UFO enthusiasts. Most of them had not spoken publicly in years. But when the cameras rolled, they told the same story they had told as children. The same details, the same sadness, the same warning. One woman, now a mother of two, said she still felt the presence of the being sometimes, a quiet reminder that the world was fragile. A man, now an environmental activist, said the encounter had shaped his entire life. He had dedicated himself to protecting the planet because of what he had felt that day. Another witness, who had become a teacher, said she had never told her students about the incident, but she thought about it every day. The documentary also included new evidence. Researchers had analyzed the children's drawings using machine learning, a tool that can detect patterns of deception. The algorithm found no statistical evidence of fabrication. The drawings were too consistent, too detailed, too emotionally charged to be invented. They were the product of real perception. This is where the story deepens. The Ariel School incident is not just about UFOs. It is about how society treats evidence that does not fit the approved narrative. Dr. Mack was not destroyed because he was wrong. He was destroyed because he asked the wrong question. The question was not, did the children see a UFO? The question was, why is it so hard for us to take children seriously when they tell us something extraordinary? Consider the alternative explanations. The skeptics say mass hysteria. But mass hysteria typically spreads through social contagion, with one person's story influencing another. In this case, the children drew their pictures within hours, before they could compare notes. The drawings are consistent, but not identical. There is variation, as you would expect from individual perception. That is not hysteria. That is shared experience. The skeptics also point to the X-Files, but the show had not yet aired in Zimbabwe when the incident occurred. And the environmental warning, the core of the children's message, was not a common trope in 1990s pop culture. It was not until years later that environmental themes became mainstream. The children were ahead of their time. Then there is the psychological explanation, false memory. Children are suggestible, the argument goes. They can be led by adults. But who led them? The teachers were skeptical. The parents were confused. The journalists were cautious. There was no charismatic figure planting ideas. The children's memories, tested over decades, have not changed. False memories typically fade or shift. These memories remain sharp, emotional, and consistent. The most compelling evidence, however, is the change in the children's behavior. Many of them became environmental activists. They did not just talk about it, they acted. They changed their careers, their lifestyles, their values. Can a false memory produce that kind of lifelong, positive behavioral change? Psychologists say it is unlikely. False memories are usually shallow, lacking the emotional depth that drives real transformation. This brings us to a deeper question. Why is academia so resistant to taking such evidence seriously? Dr. Mack faced not just criticism, but institutional punishment. Harvard did not investigate him because they thought he was wrong. They investigated him because they thought he was dangerous. He was challenging the boundaries of acceptable inquiry. And that, more than the UFOs themselves, is the real story. The pattern repeats. In 2023, the United States Congress held hearings on unidentified aerial phenomena, or UAPs. Former intelligence officials testified under oath that the government had recovered non-human materials. They said there was a decades-long cover-up. The Pentagon, they claimed, had suppressed evidence of craft that defied known physics. The hearings were historic, but the response was the same: skepticism, dismissal, mockery. The institutional resistance that Mack faced in the 1990s is now happening at the national security level. Whistleblowers are vilified. Evidence is classified. The burden of proof is set impossibly high. And the public is left to wonder, why is it so hard to admit that we do not know everything? There is a historical parallel. In 1977, in the village of Broadhaven in Wales, dozens of schoolchildren reported seeing a UFO and a silver-suited figure. The incident was investigated by the British Ministry of Defense, which concluded it was a hoax. But the children, now adults, still insist it was real. The Broadhaven and Ariel cases share the same pattern: children, consistency, dismissal. It is a recurring phenomenon that demands explanation beyond simple hoax. What if the real mystery is not the UFOs, but our unwillingness to look at them? What if the evidence is there, but we refuse to see it because it threatens our worldview drive? Mack understood this. He knew that the Ariel children were not just witnesses to a strange event. They were messengers, and their message was not about aliens. It was about us. The children said the beings were sad. Sad about what we are doing to the earth. Sad that we cannot see the damage we are causing. Sad that we refuse to change. That message, delivered by children to a Harvard psychiatrist, was ignored, but the children did not forget. They grew up, and they carried that sadness with them. Now, 30 years later, the question is not whether the UFO was real. The question is whether we are ready to listen, because the children are adults now. They have nothing to gain by lying. They have families, careers, reputations. They are not seeking fame. They are seeking truth. And the truth they tell is the same today as it was in 1994. The story of the aerial school is not over. It is waiting for us to decide what we believe, and the choice we make will say more about us than about the beings in that silver craft.